Ben and Waldo introduced themselves to me pretty much together. Um, and it was a long time before I was able to write the entire book. Um, I had this image of a young boy around 11 years old. He was obsessed with this app on his phone that displayed the cosmos and the constellations, which is a real app. My son at the time was around 11, and he had that app. Um, and um, and then around this boy sort of materialized this across the street neighbor named Dr. Ben Wilf, and this very beautiful friendship that sort of blossomed between these two very unlikely friends, and then this world of people who sprang up around them. For Ben, it was, his wife Mimi and his two grown children, Sarah and Theo. For Waldo, it was his father Shankman and his mother Alice. And I think the the feeling of, and this was a feeling more than an idea of the way that these people's lives would impact one another, the way that our lives all have um, effects that we don't necessarily know, and an impact on perfect strangers that we don't necessarily know. And so I started that book. I was writing um, in a very almost, I mean, confident is not exactly the right word because I'm never confident, but I felt as connected to these characters in this story as more than anything I've ever written. And then I hit a wall, and the wall that I hit was I was trying to tell their story backwards in time. I started it in 2010 on this one night when Ben and Waldo meet, and a lot of things go down on that night. And then I moved backward in time to New Year's Eve of 1999, Y2K New Year's Eve. And then a lot of things go down on that night, including Waldo being born. And then if I keep on going backward in time, then there's no more Waldo. It was a really flawed idea because Waldo to me was the absolute heartbeat of the book, and I had no intention of making it this metaphysical book where, I Waldo hadn't been born yet, then there's no book. So I couldn't I had worked myself up into such a tangled knot, and I couldn't figure out how to untangle it. So I put it in a drawer, and it was really painful to do that because I knew the pages were good. I loved the characters. I knew them. I felt like I was failing them. And I didn't come back to that book, which didn't have a title at the time. It just was the one that got away. And it wasn't until more than 10 years later, during the pandemic, I'd written other books. I wrote my book about writing, still writing. I I wrote Hourglass. I wrote Inheritance. Um, and wait, is that right? Yeah. After I had put the book away, I wrote those books. And it was the pandemic. Suddenly, I, like all of us, I was very much stuck at home, and I was cleaning out my office closet one day, and there was this pile of 100 pages, and something just said to me, sit down and read this. So I sat down and read it, and the extraordinary thing for me, it was really miraculous. It'll never happen again. I wish it would. It was so amazing to rediscover this novel that was already like halfway there. But I thought, oh, so these are two sections of about 50 pages each that are each told about 10 years apart. 2010, New Year's Eve of 2000. And the thought that went through my mind was, and now it's 2020. Who would they be? And that was another thunderclap because I thought, oh, well, Waldo would be a college student. Where would Waldo be in college? What would Waldo be doing? How would he have survived his childhood? He'd have to come home. Oh, that wouldn't be good for him. He has such a difficult relationship with his dad. Where would Shankman be? Where would Ben be? Where would Sarah and Theo be? Theo has a restaurant. What would he be doing during the pandemic? And it wasn't that I wanted to make the pandemic a big part of the novel. In fact, I hardly wanted to make the pandemic any part of the novel, but it gave me, and I think in Signal Fires, the finished book, maybe there are 5 or 6 pages in the whole book that take place in 2020, but it acted as a fulcrum of this other point in time from which I could do some of the storytelling. And from the time that I figured that out, it only took me about 6 months to finish the book. I just was on fire. In those pages that I initially wrote, I had Ben and Waldo meeting by the magic tree. Waldo calls it the magic tree. Ben is horrified by that. We don't know why. There's something about this tree that's different from all the other trees in the neighborhood. It feels a little bit sinister and mysterious. Um, when I put those 100 pages in the drawer, I did not know exactly what happened at the magic tree. I figured I knew it had something to do with the Wilf children and that it had happened long ago, but I didn't know exactly what. And so when I went back to those pages, the first thing I did was sat down and took a deep breath and just thought, I need to know what happened at the magic tree. I need to write the opening. And I wrote that it's essentially a prologue, that's maybe 3 pages long. And I wrote that in one go. And the first word in the book is and I had this feeling that the first word in the book needed to be and, like it was already happening. It had always already been happening, and there needed to be this language that gave the reader a sense that this was a book that's, the rules were going to be, we're going to play with time, we're going to upend time, we're going to move around in time, and and the narrator, the sort of omniscient narrator of it all, is kind of saying, just trust me, I got this, I'm in control here. um, and I knew that I couldn't write the rest of the book unless I nailed that. And then when I finished that scene, I was able to go back into those 100 pages. The only thing that really changed in those first 100 pages is the character of Sarah. In the initial 100 pages, she was still living in LA, but Peter was sort of the big shot Hollywood producer, and she was a Hollywood wife. And that just didn't track for me. I wanted Sarah to be a badass. I wanted Sarah to be like, I wanted her to be an agent in her own self-destructiveness, not a victim. And so I rewrote her to a large extent, and that was like just shockingly easy. It just kind of it just and then it just moved from there. I thought, well, where do we go now? Okay, we'll go back to 2020 because we need to know what happens, on the rest of that night. And okay, now we'll go to 2014 and we'll see Waldo as a teenager. And it was intuitive. And at some point, I had the feeling that I wanted the novel to end before any of this had started. And I didn't know if I could pull it off, but I knew that I wanted to try, that I wanted it to go back all the way to the very beginning of this family moving to Division Street.